to episode 5 of Targeted Impact, helping membership organizations thrive by Wild Apricot. So you're sure you're aware at this point, this is a bi-weekly show where we invite on a guest who's an expert, thought leader, insider, seasoned practitioner within a space to take your questions directly. My name is Andrew McQuah. I'm the head of demand gen here at Wild Apricot, and I will be interacting with our guest on your behalf. Now, today is going to be all about events, and not just virtual events, which are really important right now, but we're even going to talk about those amazing things we used to do in the past called in-person events. And with those topics, I can't think of a better person to have on our show than our friend Rich Vallaster of A to Z. Rich, officially welcome to Targeted Impact.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to talking to the audience today.
Awesome, amazing. So I know you're the right guy for the job here, Rich, but I just want to highlight some of the amazing kind of accolades to you in your career, so everyone knows that we got the right guy for this. So you're the director of client relations and solutions over at A to Z, so event management softwares, and you've been in this space for 20 years, and you've done both in-person and virtual event work. You're a member of the Center for Exhibition Industry Research Council, so not only do you work in the space, but you work to make it a better place. So thanks for that. And recently, you completed a digital event strategist certification from PCMA. And with all of this kind of amazing knowledge you've gathered over the years about events and running events, you were actually included in a New York Times article just recently about the future events, right?
Yeah, it's pretty exciting to talk to you. It's exciting and nervous at the same time. When the New York Times calls and says they want your opinion on what's happening, you get a little nervous. Don't lie.
Listen, I've been there. I did it once in a previous position where we were talking about it was virtual influencers. So not like influencers on Instagram, literally like the virtual ones, like fake ones, computer generated. It was a harrowing experience, but very cool. Anyway, I'm glad we got that in common. So with that, I feel like I've done my little intro, but I'm sure there's so much more to talk about. So why don't I kick it over to you for a few seconds? You can tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. I work with our clients, really big and small. I mean, some of the largest trade shows and exhibitions in the country, as well as smaller events. I do a lot of volunteer work. You mentioned my work with Sphere and research, so we're sort of leading the charge of what folks need to know in the events business. End up on a lot of client advisory boards and exhibitor advisory boards and things. So I spend a good amount of time. That's why people call me the trade show wonk. I love the business. Did at large outdoor events as well, and so it's been a fun time and a scary time, and what's made it enjoyable is sort of going through this with our clients. I mean, this is new for folks, so don't feel bad out there. I think everybody's going, what in the world has happened? So that's been a big adjustment, and so that's been the rewarding part, is trying to help clients navigate this and really look at the best practice and consume as much as I can. So to bring it and share and help folks that are either just navigating this or starting to think about it, bring the knowledge that we've already learned. And I've actually put on a virtual event and in the process and attending a lot of events. So hope to help everybody out today.
Amazing. That's great. Thank you for all that. And I'm sure everyone's really happy that you're the guy we have here today. So with that, let's talk a little bit about this show, everyone, before we get to the questions. First off, if you'd like to ask a question to Rich, all you have to do is you have to go to our questions box and just type it in. Our team here will source those and pass those over to me to ask to Rich directly. Now, just as a fair warning, we do have a lot of people here today, and we're going to do our very best to get through as many questions as possible. I promise you, and sadly, we will not get to all of them. If we don't get to your questions, we're really sorry. But the good news is afterwards, all those questions that get unanswered, we collect them all up, we put them in a blog post, and you will be able to find them. So hopefully we'll get to yours, but if not, my apologies ahead of time, but we're doing our best. And if you want to ask a question, other than typing it in the question box, you can also do so on Twitter. If you use the hashtag Targeted Impact, our team will pick that up and put you in the queue as well. So either in the questions or Twitter, you're all set. Second, we're really going to go deep on events today. We're going to talk about person events, virtual events, how to run great events. That's Rich's, wheelhouse. What we're not going to do today is answer technical questions. So if you have questions about how do I do this with Wild Apricot, how to do that, we love to answer those questions. We have a show once every 2 months on that. But if you need answers more quickly, and I bet you do, all you have to do is you have to go to our customer support if you are a current customer, or you can ask our onboarding team if you're currently in trial. And if you're not a customer, you're not in trial, but you just want to try out Wild Apricot, it is free to try. So be sure to check it out. We always love to have new people try the software. With that, and wow, that was a lot to cover early on. We can do questions now. But before we get to your questions, I want to ask the audience a question because we're in a very different world right now with events. So my first thing, and we're launching a poll here, is when do you expect to run your next event? Do you expect to run your next in-person event specifically in the next 30 days, 1 to 3 months, 4 to 6 months, 6 months to a year, or more than a year? Right? We got that running, Rich. So people are answering. I'm going to start giving you some results when we get them in. But you recently did some research in this space. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think this is an ongoing sentiment poll to see what folks are changing. Obviously, COVID is kind of day by day, week by week. But as many have probably heard, CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, announced this week that they are going to be virtual, and that's sort of the first January 2021 event that has sort of said, okay, we're going to be virtual. So I think there's some, that's something to pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're pretty stable here. So, nearly 40% of people think it's going to be between 6 months and a year from now. And we got about equal numbers who think in the 4 to 6 range at 20-ish percent and at 15-ish percent in more than a year. So definitely kind of in the longer term more than the short term. Is that kind of in line with what you've seen elsewhere?
Yeah, and I think the quicker folks decide to make the decision to potentially move virtual, I know there's always sort of sometimes impacts on legal or contracts or force majeure, but the longer your runway you have to think about, converting to virtual or hybrid, the better folks are. So I think that's one thing that I'm starting to see is that longer runway time.
Right. Okay. Well, it's good to know we're always consistent, right? If everyone said in the next 30 days, I think it would be a very different show. With that, everyone, thank you for your input. We're going to take your questions now. So you can just drop them right there in the questions box. We will pick those up, and let's see what we got coming in. Okay. All right, Rich. First question. Events are a huge part of just about every organization's business as usual operation. What are the state of events today, based on like your expertise, and where do you think they'll actually go in the next 6 to 12 months? So someone's reacting to the poll there for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've been through events like 9/11 and weather events like Hurricane Katrina to the Great Recession. I've been through a lot of these things, and a lot of those were either regional or sort of acute moments in time or long. Sorry if you hear a little bit of noise, there's a little bit of construction in the background, but they were sort of we sort of knew what the timelines or how to fix things or move forward. This is sort of the first moment in time I think that there's an unclear picture ahead of us. So where I see it eventually landing is one, people love in-person events. They're going to come back as soon as we want to. I mean, people definitely want that. What the long-term piece I see is that hybrid will be it, because even in the middle term, there may be people that don't feel comfortable travel, that don't want to travel, or companies don't allow them to travel. So offering both an in-person and an online experience will probably be the longer piece. I mean, virtual events aren't new. We've always had the technology. It's always gotten better. We've just, I think, always been so successful at in-person events that that prevented these sort of online options. But now when we were forced to do it, we're starting to see some value because the barriers of travel or costs or things that I mean, people can register the morning of your event if it's virtual because they don't have to do certain things, and that's been a real shift for folks, is to sort of how to figure out now. Wow, people don't, there's not a timeline that we're used to. So I think that's going to be the short thing. I do think people want to meet in person, and we're going to see that come roaring back. How that will look, there's a lot of folks up in the air of what that is, and I think we're all trying to figure out everything from serving food to socially distanced, happy hours and things like that. So I think that's going to continue to ebb and flow, but that's where I see both short and long term.
Great, awesome. Yeah, that's an interesting advantage of the virtual space. You do get to kind of register the day of. I guess the inverse of that is if I register for an in-person event, you can pretty much guarantee I'm going to be there, right? Whereas if I register for an online event, maybe 2 or 3 weeks or 2 months even ahead of time, I may not show up. So I'm curious, what do you think is a great way to make sure those people who do register show up?
Yeah, there's a couple ways to do that. I think a lot of it is creating engagement points. Is one is incentivizing folks to sign up early. That either they'll be able to talk in a community or interact with their fellow attendees. Things that or look, we can't send you event swag or send you something cool if you sign up the day of. So there's incentives to register early, but and then keeping them engaged, because those are the numbers that I think we're going to be interesting to see, especially if your event is free. Free, there's no skin in the game. I'm willing to sign up for free. There's no barrier. And then if I show up, so those are going to be the trick to take your data and say, okay, here's how many people signed up and here's how many people actually attended. And even attendance can be divided up in data. How engaged were they? Did they just show up for one session, two sessions? And some of that has to do with the price model. So it really will be a challenge to look at those folks. I agree, 2 months out. But I also struggle because people are asking me a lot about, man, people are signing up so last minute. But even for me personally, if somebody asked me for an event 2 months from now, I'd say maybe. I don't know where we'll be in 2 months. So it's sort of hard to ask our attendees to any event to think that horizon now, I think, seems so far off for events.
Yeah, that makes sense. I really loved how you touched on how all the different ways you can kind of cut the data, right? Because I think it's I'm going to guess it's a little bit easier with digital events than in person, right? It's I can see how engaged someone is in chat. I can't necessarily see in the room how many people are asking questions. I'm not there with like a clicker. Okay, question.
Yeah, the data that's sort of the next frontier that's sort of offered in digital worlds. But it also may point to some dark corners that we're not willing to accept yet. That there's no hiding. I mean, that the data is going to show less engagement, or I know a lot of folks are worried about some of their ways they generate revenue through sponsorship or people that exhibit. I mean, you can't hide behind people like that have an event and sponsors feel like, well, it was not many people or slow. A lot of that's just eyeballs. There isn't data to back that up. But in the virtual world, it is going to start to show what that looks like. And so organizations are going to really have to show that they delivered on that value. And right now, I think people are struggling to understand, because my sort of big line has been, no one is, most folks at this point have yet to attend a virtual event, have yet to exhibit at one, yet to be a sponsor, yet to be an attendee, yet to be a speaker. So everybody's nervous to understand even how to interact in this virtual world, let alone monetize it.
Yeah, brave new world for sure. Okay, let's go to the next question. We got them. They are rolling in. So Jill would like to know best advice for making a virtual event interactive. What do you got, Rich?
A lot of different things. I'm the big believer is you almost have to start to tell a story. A virtual event is a story, that needs to have an opener, kind of a big opener or a big close, interesting points through the book, and ways to engage them. Chat. I mean, and a lot of ways to say that interact with speakers, interact with sessions. More fun things that are out there. I mean, I'm seeing creative things like taking breaks and having music or games or, gamifying those situations. But it's not just those interactions, but you have to keep people going along, because in this virtual world, what I've found is, I myself included, I'm a tap, click, or tab away from distraction. So, trying to stay like, hey, stay engaged, and some folks that, have different ways, whether it's mobile apps or emails or incentives or games, to basically say, keep coming back. But again, you got to keep those chapters turning, because we all know that those books that we've read and then we get to chapter 3 and we put it down, we never pick back up. So that's sort of the way I think about it. It's now more of a production and making sure that there are points to keep you engaged. And those are getting more, I've even seen drunk yoga. I mean, crazy things just to get people to say, hey, come back and get engaged.
Okay, I'm just going to say there may be a liability concern there. So we do not formally
They're
endorse
recommended.
yoga, but it's someone's tried it. Awesome.
Well, and there's virtual happy hours. There are another way too, that at the end of the day, to start to say, like, let's get together. And a lot of it I also see is getting ways for folks by affinity. So, hey, you're from this area, or this is your title, or this is what you do, or that's a way to get like-minded people into sessions, into rooms, into things like that. So yeah, I mean, sometimes that's in a happy hour, sometimes that's a session. So yeah, those are some of the ways that I'm seeing folks get creative. But again, it's more work now in some ways, because you have to think about, if someone drops off, how do you get them back engaged?
that's a great point. Definitely, once you lose them, it's a lot tougher. But looking at our attendance, it's only going in one direction right now, so I'm happy about that. Okay, next question. Steve would like to know any guidance on doing strategic planning virtually. So I'm going to interpret that as they want to do some strategic planning, but they want to make it a virtual meeting for their organization. So how do you get your members together to strategically plan?
It's well, I think that's another, I mean, good or bad of this is that we're finding that a lot of our typical strategic meetings, some of our board meetings, some of these events that have always been in person, have now had to go virtual, and you don't have that typical in-person creative session. And so a lot of folks are starting to, I would say, cut things shorter. If you would have typically spent an hour doing a session, cut it in half. Being creative even in Zoom and being able to do breakouts and things like that. But you really have to start to think about maybe what would have traditionally been like, look, I've done those board retreats. It's a day, and we just crank it out because we're all in person and we have lunch. And this is where now you have to start to look at potentially spreading that up, especially too as you look across time zones, because we have folks that say, well, my board flies in from all over, now in a time zone world, because in the virtual world, typically you're in where you were was the time zone. So making sure that you sort of figure out those spots that work for the audience and break it up more. And then again, it's sort of more telling the stories, trying to get, engagement pieces, getting creative, even in the way you use some of the tools, the virtual tools, like, whiteboarding and stuff like that. And some of it is also trying to get creative back presenting, say, like, normally we just stood in front of each other and drawn. But get creative, because now you have to do it in a virtual world. So again, it's trying to be a little more interactive that you would have had done in person. So.
Okay, that's interesting. Our next question really dovetails nicely. So Che would like to know, or I guess Che is interested, in your opinion, how effective are breakout rooms in the virtual space, and specifically when it comes to networking? So, are they are they valuable, and can you use them for networking?
That's where I kind of go. I try to lean back to, we lose that sort of serendipitous breakouts and things where, it's a little easier to be standing somewhere and, oh, where are you from? Or, oh, you read their badge and those sort of things. So I'm a big believer pushing back to that sort of affinity, putting folks in rooms that already have, some sort of commonality, and say, oh, you are the directors of this group, or you are from this, or, even social things like same sports team. At least then when you get into a virtual world, you could say, did you see that pitch last night? I mean, because that starts the conversation. I've even found some groups jokingly putting in the introverts room to say, hey, look, how do we get folks that are not normally, because some breakout rooms, and part of this, I'm a trained focus group moderator, is when you put different types of people in a room, it's always going to be people that sort of step up and start, having conversations. So either having a moderator or having some sort of instant, oh, interesting, we're all directors of this, again, those titles, is any commonality, any affinity, at least then starts the conversation. Or the other is the topic that you want to cover. Let's break up, virtual events, or let's cover those topics, because then we go into, these breakout rooms and have some reason to have a conversation versus, so where are you, those just never start. At least you've got those conversation starters. And especially if you've got folks on your team that can help sort of kickstart things, that always helps.
Yeah, I love that Kickstarter idea. Definitely, if the goal for Che is to kind of get people to network, maybe do something really quick up front, 5-10 minutes, give them something to talk about, then put them in that room, and they can have a conversation. Then, of course, when you're talking about that, eventually it naturally goes to, so what do you do? What's your organization? What's your role? And I think that would work really well. Great. Okay, we have a question from Karen. What is the most creative idea you've seen used? Okay, sorry, this is a little bit more, this is a lot of words in one question, so I'm trying to process it. I'm going to read first, and I'm going to tell you what Karen would like to know. Okay, so what is the most creative idea you've seen when attached to a virtual event? So I guess it could be not just the event itself, but things you do in the event, to give people either surprising or delighting or engaging experiences. So let's break that into three. What can you do to surprise people in a virtual event in a positive way?
Some of where a lot of folks I'm seeing are, because a lot of folks are home, surprising them with mail, other than bills,
Oh.
whether that's swag or gift cards, or I've seen folks like Uber Eats have started to partner with virtual events to, get a sponsor for that. Look at, okay, we're not all together, but we've just sent you a gift card to get lunch tomorrow, or, those sort of things that you suddenly get in the mail because now, we're not physically at the event. So I've seen some really creative options there. Or ways for folks to capture, again, drives that registration a little earlier. Like, look, if you want to get some of these things, the surprises, I've seen some creative uses in terms of celebrity appearances, or, breakout music sessions, or again, I think what excites me about the virtual world is the limitation that an in-person event doesn't have in the virtual world, that you can get some maybe speakers or folks that you could just never have gotten at your event or brought them in or afforded them. There's a lot of folks now that are far more affordable because, tuning into a Zoom for 15 minutes. There's even a website called Cameo, CMEO, and you get celebrities to do things and say things or be on Zoom. And so I've seen some really creative events, that a celebrity introduces, for a couple $100 or $100, depends on how A or B or C or D or whatever list they are willing to come and do intros for your event. So there's some of the fun things that when you suddenly have, a sports star or somebody that it's fun or silly, or, the guy that does the, the wrestling, and you welcome to this event, those are some of the fun things that sort of surprise attendees that they're just not expecting that you would have. But again, in the virtual world, they're a little easier to pull off. I know there was a third item I realized. I think I missed.
Surprising, delight, and engaging. I think all those things you said would be pretty engaging. So I think we got it covered. I have to say my all-time favorite surprise at an event was at HubSpot. I think it was about 4-5 years, or sorry, Inbound. So HubSpot's event Inbound in Boston, and they had David Ortiz show up. So that was sorry, go for it, Rich.
No, I agree. I mean, those are the things that, now you have to plan a little more.
Yep.
But yeah, some of those bonus sessions or things like that. Yeah. The other, well, I'll give one more too. Sure. And this helps for those of you who are looking for, revenue ideas. A lot of people love tours or behind the scenes things, or things that now, in the virtual world, like you can get away with, kind of cruddy video. I mean, but my iPhone does a pretty good job, showing people behind the scenes. People love, I mean, even in the virtual world, there's like the behind the scenes moments, or like, let's turn the camera around so you can see what the virtual world looks like, or, even what's behind us in the things like that. So those are the kind of other options that I've seen, is that, wow, we can take a factory tour, or where where your office is, or things, because, we're all virtual.
Yeah, and then that's definitely probably a lot cheaper than a celebrity. And even the Uber Eats one, if you are trying to surprise your board members and let them know like you really appreciate them volunteering their time, sending everyone like, $20 an hour beforehand and saying, hey, we're taking out of the budget, order yourself dinner for tonight's meeting. That would work pretty well,
Or double that up. I've seen some really creative things, is that, we've sent you, now sometimes you can't ship alcohol to certain places, but I've seen some people, like, we'll send a bottle of wine, they'll bring somebody in to do then a cheese pairing, or we're going to send you the cheese, you pick the wine. And so it could be educational and fun, where, you bring in somebody, a lot of mixologists too, to say, like, tonight we're going to make a quarantini, and, like, we're going to show you how we brought this mixologist in, and we've sent you the recipe list in advance. To follow. So go get those things, and tonight, before we kick off or after the session, we're going to teach you to make that recipe.
Oh, that's so cool. And I bet there are a lot of mixologists who are free agents right now and willing to help out some wonderful organizations. So moving forward, we got a question from Gil. With so many virtual events, how do you keep your participants from suffering from virtual event fatigue? That's a real issue, right?
Yeah, and that's going to keep continuing. I mean, I think when everybody was sort of, locked down in a lot of places, people started consuming differently, and now that's ebbing and flowing. It still goes back to that good storytelling and building the event story. But it's also where I think organizations should think about it creatively, that just because it was a day or an evening or an hour, maybe it becomes 3 days over time, or a couple hours, or that you start to think, I think we're trying to, the line that everyone jokes about when the New York Times was my plop and drop line. Like, you can't plop and drop what you were doing in the physical world into the online world. And so I'm seeing some creative uses even in theming, like we'll have theme weeks. We're going to take this content or these events. So that way, again, there's another reason to sort of keep me coming back in interesting ways. And so they're taking the, like, from the food world, you're deconstructing it and kind of putting it back in just different ways that you've never thought about to kind of keep people going. The other thing is that a lot of folks are forgetting, ask your audiences, ask your members, ask your users, because some of them will tell you how they want to consume or not consume, or when they want to consume it. Or, I showed a photo of a mom with a kid on a screen the other day, and I was talking about, this is your virtual event, because this is kind of how people are consuming these things. So other ways or other times, just because traditionally maybe it did make sense in this time slot, but now it doesn't. So those are the kind of things that you have to start thinking about.
Yeah, definitely kind of go outside the box a little bit. I have spoken to a couple people at various times about virtual events. I have not heard the deconstruct idea, so I really appreciate that, Rich. Thanks for that. Okay, moving forward, we got a question from Thomas. So sadly for Thomas's organization, networking was a big part of their annual banquet. And I guess part of that, by having these networking opportunities, it also allowed them to attract sponsors. So how do you kind of recapture that magic of networking, but also getting sponsors for a virtual event?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm going to be honest. It's probably one of the biggest challenges that I've seen. Some of it comes down to a couple things. One is depending on the size of the organization of the sponsor. Some organizations are smaller and don't have marketing departments or a marketing person. But I've found a lot of times talking to their marketing person and say, what are your goals? What are you really hoping to get out of this? Is, as I always say, pick up the phone, ask them the goal of sponsorship, because they may tell you, well, I love doing it, but what I really need is this, or if I could talk to this person or that person. And sometimes it's, I'm still willing to be a sponsor, but if you can connect me to this. A lot of things too is that don't miss opportunities, especially at live events, that, to do introductions, to allow your sponsors to speak, to say, I'm going to introduce tonight, at our dinner, our keynote speaker. I am Rich. I'm from this. I'm so proud to be a sponsor of this organization. We've always been there. I'm sorry we're not in person. I'm here to introduce. So those sort of opportunities to let them be your voice, I think, has been really helpful. But a lot of it comes down to, sometimes when I call sponsors, what they end up telling you, what they want out of it is sometimes really achievable. Or they're like, really, we just wanted to list. Or if we can then send something to them, that, we're not there in person, but we've sent you a, champagne flute, make sure we all do a toast tonight. It's got their logo on it. So some of those opportunities, just to try to understand, was it the FaceTime? Was it speaking? Was it, creating those networking moments? Or again, can you match make me? Can you line me up with a couple folks? I'm seeing, this is a little outside for some events, but looking at saying, a lot of sponsors are like, look, I want to meet this set of buyers. And so some people are saying, I just want 15, 20 minutes to scheduling, like, one-on-one meetings and facilitating those things. Or I just want to introduce my new product or service, or could I send it? I know there's always a list concern too, but that's where you guys can control that thing to say, look, we'll send it. If you want it to directors and above, we need 40 of them, and you go ahead and fulfill it, or we'll fulfill it. So some of those things I would ask them. Sometimes you'd be surprised how willing they are to say, this is what I really need to accomplish. And then come together to brainstorm that. Because I don't like to go with, here's what we've always had. I'm like, what is your goal? Involve their marketing team and go from there.
Yeah, that's great. And it definitely got me thinking, getting to that heart of what they really want. What we're experiencing today isn't in a bubble. It's everyone is feeling this, right? And so if your sponsors say, I really need to, this is a profile of people in your organization I was really kind of hoping to reach, right? Your VIPs, in other words, your VIPs know that your organization's having a hard time. So if you say to them, hey, we got this sponsor lined up, but they'd like to talk to you for 5 to 10 minutes. Can you make time for that? I mean, it's actually a lot easier now to have a conversation, right? You don't have to have it during the event. You can set it up days before, days after, as long as you facilitate that conversation. One, that your sponsor you're trying to attract is going to be really happy, and your members going to feel, like they're really doing their part. So I think that's another really great opportunity in that space right now.
Well, and sometimes too, creatively looking at, where we are now and maybe where we are next year to say, look, here's how we're going to bundle this, or, we're going to take part of your sponsorship dollars. Cause I'm a big believer. I don't like to give the money back. I want to get creative and roll sponsorship and things like that forward. And I would say a lot of companies, now this is changing a bit, are being really flexible because everybody sort of understands the situation. But it is more and more important to have that conversation because, I find it like, wow, I really appreciate this conversation. So.
Okay, awesome, Rich. Thank you. Okay, interesting. We got an in-person question. We touched on this a little bit earlier. Troy specifically would like to know, do you think the future of events is going to be purely hybrid? So there's always going to, like, when we get back to in-person on the regular basis, are all in-person events going to have an in-person piece and also simultaneously have an online streaming opportunity to them?
Where I think it will occur is if you can generate revenue from the online portion, because again, I think there's a subset of the audience that will always go in person, but I think we're going to start to see different audiences that would have never potentially or will never potentially attend the in-person event say, I'd still love to consume this content, whether it's live in that moment or you record it and then sell the content afterwards. That's what's interesting to me. I mean, there are some challenges, and even when you look into streaming live, depending on the city you're in, can have impacts on what is considered broadcasting. But there is some consideration that, like, I would love to go to this event, but I could budget a online portion because I'm not going to have travel and hotel and things like that. So I do think there's going to be this interesting concept of content that I could still potentially consume and benefit from, and it's a different experience. I think everybody goes into these both sides, in person and online, to know that they're going to be different experiences. But if you could generate revenue from both, I mean, that may balance or may exceed. We may make more off a hybrid model if we could actually pull it off and say, wow, these are the people that came in person, and that's one revenue model. But look how many people bought our content afterwards. Or you also bundle in for the in-person to say, look, you're also going to get the online content, because we know you can't sit in every session.
Yeah.
So that will drive online. Then there's the group that may never come in person, but why not, generate revenue? So that's where I think that sweet spot will be. But some events too will go back to in person, and just because there won't be that desire for online, or depending on your event. I mean, if it's a sensory event, like if there's food or taste or smell or touch or things that just are hard to do in the virtual world, those will probably lean far more online. I mean, we work with different events that have food at them. It's hard to taste in the virtual world.
Yeah, I think an all-day food festival, and I'm just looking at delicious food and I can't touch it, smell it, eat it, would be very painful. I think we're talking like some very large-scale events. This is kind of like the focus, but I think definitely even in the smaller event space, even if you're like an association, you get together, like the St. Louis Dentists Association. I don't know if that's a real association. I don't know if they're a customer. If they're real, I hope they are. I really do. But I don't see any reason why to think that, like, we've really kind of tested the waters in the virtual space. Definitely you can have your in-person, and I think there's going to be a strong desire for that because of how much value we get from those in-person events. There's no reason you can't almost have my mind just flashes to like a court stenographer who's managing the virtual space and pulling the questions like we do right here for that. So definitely an opportunity there, I think. Okay, moving forward. So I guess our conversation about hybrid models piqued Marianne's interest. So Marianne, thanks for this question. She was curious if you just had any idea, insight on setting up registration fee structures for some kind of hybrid model.
Yeah, I mean, what I would love, and maybe this is a little idealistic at this point, is that an in-person and a hybrid model would be the same cost. And even if you were to cancel, you would lose out on everything. So let me play this out. Let's say it's $100. I'm gonna make up an amount. It's $100 for in-person. It's $100 for online, because they both provide the same value. They're both different experiences. Online, you can consume in the comfort of your home. You don't travel. There's cost savings there, and you can consume potentially on demand afterwards. In person, you're going to get certain types of networking, and you're going to get in-person things, and maybe you'll also get the online content. So That's where I'd love to get. What I'm seeing right now is that, in person means, or virtual, with a lot of folks went free. It was the easy thing to do. That's not sustainable. A lot of folks are certainly charging less than for their in-person, because some people are saying, well, you're not, I don't get drinks or food or things like that. And I know that costs money, but then there's costs in putting on a virtual event, and some hidden costs I'm starting to see, and production value, and things that you're just not ready for. But again, some of that packaged content, if they weren't coming to your in-person event and it's priced less, and you can sort of put it up and you can gate it and they can purchase it or consume it, to me, that's almost, extra money. So that's where I can look at, maybe that can be lower in cost, because maybe that lives on for 6 months. Once the in-person's done, the money's come and spent and things like that. The hard part will be, again, how these reg trends play out. Is like someone, when do they wait to commit to in-person versus online? But at some point, as you scale up online, there's no more extra cost. You're not buying extra food. You're not buying extra batches. You're not buying, insert whatever event costs that are there, that your online model, they start to just, they really start to pay for themselves.
Okay, very, very cool and very thorough on that, Rich. So thank you for that. So this is an interesting one, a little different than what we've seen thus far. Ashley would like to know if you can give an example, maybe you can give us a couple, of large expos that have recently transitioned to a virtual space. Ashley typically attended the Ohio School Board Association Expo, so that gives you a little bit of an idea of the size she's speaking of.
Yeah, I mean, we've, sorry for the noise there. Again, we are starting to see folks transition. I mean, I think the biggest in the industry was, again, CES, Consumer Electronics Show, staying virtual in January. Pretty much, I will be honest, I mean, any event happening now is virtual. I don't know of really any in-person event. I mean, other than small, maybe, 50 person that they can really scale, but anything, it's got the word trade show attached to it. I mean, again, there's overseas, there's been some events happening, but again, this Back Together Again event in Orlando that was just really put on by industry folks was sort of the first thing I've started to see in person. But you can pretty much assume at any event is virtual at this point. I'll tell you an event, the American Horticultural Show, I think it's virtualhorticult.org or something like that. American Horticultural, look for their search for the virtual event. I'll give you a tip. They have done some of the best, when you look up under their resources page, best education to virtual. And I think I would encourage everybody, like, go back to my earlier statement, no one's done this yet. So the more you educate, like, this is what it's like to be in the virtual world, and set those expectations, do videos, do webinars, because it's just hard to know. So I don't know, didn't answer that, because I mean, honestly, name any event, do any event, they're all virtual. I don't know anybody that isn't virtual, but go and look. But look at American Horticultural Show. I think some of their resources are probably some of the best I've seen to help educate your audiences. I mean, scale that for big or small. But when you read through that, you're like, oh my goodness, I'm teaching these people how to interact in the virtual world, because they've never done it. I mean, if I were to drop most of this audience off probably in front of a conference hotel or a convention center, you could probably get in, get a badge, find a session, go to the expo hall, or, find where the, even if it's a small event, you'd find out where it is. But in the virtual world, it's a lot harder.
Awesome. Great shout out there, Rich. Thanks so much for that one. Okay, we are quarter to the end of the hour. I told you this would go fast, right?
You're right.
So we're going to have time for a few more questions, and then we're going to wrap it up. So just letting everyone know we're going to be in the final swing of this thing. So interesting. I think we kind of touched on this already, but Effie would like to know if there's a benefit to keeping like a virtual event online active beyond the date of the event. I think
100%.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
100%. I mean, and I think that's where you start to add your sponsors and exhibitors and say, I think we've always just sort of like focused on like the event, whether that was a day, an evening, whatever it was, where now we're saying, well, maybe we should expose our sponsors to our audience for bigger amounts of time, before, during, or after. I'm starting to call the in-person event the capstone, because right now we don't know what that will be, or if it will be in person. So the more you can drive engagement, whether that's engagement with speakers or talking with folks in a community, like, oh, hey, you're going to go to this session too, let's talk about it. Or the speaker is going to come in 3 weeks in advance to talk about their session at hopefully the in-person event. And then afterwards, I do a lot of attendee focus groups. A lot of folks are saying that's the value now too in the post event is, hey, we heard this thing or saw this thing or went to this thing. I'd love to know how you're now implementing it, or what have you done in your organization. So if you can keep that conversation going, that's pretty exciting for folks. And now kind of in the virtual world, it's, I think, a little bit more of a safety net. That, I think about your in-person event, whatever it is a capstone. It may not happen. So how do you build folks to feel like they got a lot of value? So just in case you're suddenly not in person, you've delivered value, and you're going to say, look, afterwards, like, we're going to leave up our content, or we're going to let you engage with speakers or our sponsors. Or so yeah, that's probably sort of that expansion, the deconstruction and expansion of how do we now create maybe year-round engagement. I mean, I think we've all talked about it, but now the pressure's on because the in-person is probably a little more up in the air.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. So we've got 2 questions. And I think that's going to wrap us up. Hopefully we get through both. So I'm going to go faster. Wanda would like to know, can you talk about using pre-recorded speakers versus live speakers? And I guess related to this, for breakout rooms in the virtual space, do you have like a guidance on what size you should aim for, or is there an upper limit?
Well, I'll tell you a couple lessons that we've learned. Is one convenience of pre-recording is, the technology will have worked. You'll have it packaged and ready to go. You can still promote packaged recorded sessions as live. We did it for our virtual event because, we didn't want the risk, because again, if, Zoom goes down, we're all working from different places, you'll have that break in continuity. And oftentimes it allows your speaker to actually engage with questions as it goes. In the real world, you couldn't do that. Your speaker couldn't sit in the audience and go, "What's your question?" "Oh yeah, let me tell you but you can start to do that. And so some of that again is audience dependent. Some is interesting live, but yeah, that's what I like about pre-recording. It's a little safer. I will warn you, especially for those of you that have boards or folks that may feel less comfortable on camera. They then tend sometimes to want to say, "Can I re-record?" But you will need extra time to plan for that because, now getting folks, before everyone showed up for your event and did things there. But when you start to look at pre-recording sessions, you now need to schedule the time and make sure they're comfortable. Then you get, oh, they didn't record the audio. But at least then again, when you hit live or hit go, it's ready to go and the interaction can be different. So I like both methods. I lean more pre-recorded just because it takes out less risk. You know what it is. Or especially for those of you, I know we're going long, but for those that have like multiple things that you need that like keynote to end at this time, like when you're in person, guess what? If the keynote runs long, you get everybody there. They'll wait to the next session. But in the virtual world, they're ready for the next session. So that was a long answer, but hopefully good one.
No, I think that's a great answer. I really like that idea of, it's a live event. You have the speaker there. They can interact. I mean, especially in something like this where you have a question, they could answer questions if there's like a chat functionality. So there's like everyone can see that. It gives you a lot of opportunity. And what is the upside of a, live virtual event versus something that's pre-recorded, especially when we're speaking about specifically sessions, right? If you don't need that immediate engagement, which you don't when you're presenting, I don't see there's a reason not to pre-record your session. It just has so much upside and almost no downside.
And if you go live, I do think it's where, you start to think about a moderator or a host or things that like, as things happen, just in case, you've got that sort of interaction. But if you're live and somebody, leaves the screen, and especially in the virtual world, I'm going to go click the email. I want to go jump to something else and maybe, go do something else. So trying to make sure there's other people's in contingencies. And this is completely different for folks that haven't produced these, to think about, if the person's speaking live, the internet blips and they go down, how do we treat it? What do we do? What are those scenarios where, again, we market some things as live and then, people, but I will caution you in recording in terms of like time stamping. I recorded a session, I won't lie, and I made a reference to the point in time because it had to do with events and COVID that, by the time we actually aired it, unfortunately in COVID, things changed by the day. It really dated, and people sort of commented like, well, that was a weird, statement. And so I dated my session that suddenly was pre-recorded.
Yeah. And you can't re-edit it, right? Because at that point,
Yeah.
your hair was about 3 more inches longer, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank goodness we have barbers for the most part back now. I'm going to pause it here. Uh, First off, Rich, thank you. This has been so informative for me, so interesting. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And I know we've got a ton more questions, and we'll work to get those answered for folks. I've enjoyed this, and feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk more. I love to talk events.
Absolutely. Well, why don't I pass over to you, because I think you have some more webinars coming up that you're going to be part of, right? That you can maybe give a shout out to, or?
Yeah, we just had a webinar really focused on virtual events and exhibitors and sponsors. I know in the chat we'll post, or in the forum we'll post where you can look at. There's a lot of resources. I've written a virtual events thesaurus because I sort of struggled with, how do you call these things in the virtual world that make sense to people. We've posted some like quick start guides. My next webinar is really going to be focused on day of. So sort of talking about some of those things live, virtual. That's coming up on the 18th. I literally just wrapped my webinar yesterday, so I'm going to work on content, but trying to understand the things that we're starting to see, like when you pull this off day of. I mean, even a simple thing like a hashtag that says your event name help, so you can start to follow. So you don't want people, out there, you want the tweets about your event being really positive, and you want to be able to surface out your help questions, as people enter this world. So yeah, we're really going to focus on the day of and sort of the production and the lessons learned that we've seen from the virtual world. So that's coming up on the 18th. But again, there's other resources are there. I'm trying to write as much as I can. The one that's not on there yet is coming is my 30 virtual event sponsorship ideas. So some of these questions today I've tried to cover. Even a Zoom background with a company's logo when you do some of these breakout sessions or board meetings, easy one. So look for that resource on there too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely going to check these out because I've been obviously doing some virtual events. I'm curious, in the the virtual events thesaurus, is drunk yoga in there?
No, yoga's not in there. Yeah. But it was funny when you start thinking about, I mean, we've called these things that have such an in-person word so long in the events business, what do you call it? So I really tried to, give you guys some examples of like what you can call this in the virtual world that at least makes sense, or at least that I've seen.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely recommend anyone thinking about doing some virtual events to check out all those things that Rich just said. We are going to drop those links into the chat box, so you'll be able to read those question box. And with that, we are nearly out of time, so I'm just going to wrap this up. I always said thanks, but thanks again, Rich. That was great. There was even more resources in the last few seconds, so awesome there.
A couple of more little bites and tidbits in there, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I forgot too. We also have the Planet Leadership podcast, so I interview event professionals, and the most recent one was with Ryan Brown of NTP Events, and we talked a lot about the future of virtual events. So check that out too. I know how you can post that.
Okay, amazing. Thanks for that, Rich. So check out Rich's podcast, all those videos, his resources. You will not be sorry that you did. With that, if we didn't get to your question today, I'm really sorry. Keep an eye out for that blog post. We'll wrap everything up there. You'll be able to get answers, so check that out. I also want to remind all of our attendees, we will be sending out a survey at the end of this. So please fill that out, give us some feedback, let us know what you think, what you learned, what you'd like to see. That's really helpful for myself and our producer, Ali, who does like a bang up job making TI happen every single second week. With that, our next episode will be August 13th with Katie Appold of Do More Good. So Katie is a really smart person, really bright when it comes to marketing and leadership in the non-for-profit space. So she's going to be kind of focusing on, how do you lead through this? How do you market through this? How do you generate revenue and funding for your organization? So I think a lot of really useful stuff there for everyone. And with that, I'll just finally say, we shouted out some resources from Rich. We also have a ton of resources on the Wild Apricot webpage. So we have our COVID plan. So if you are an organization who's trying to help our world heal a little bit faster by addressing the COVID situation, you can get a free Wild Apricot account fully unlocked. We also have our cohort support resources, so you can go read there, watch recordings of targeted impact like this, read a ton of content, download some stuff, really, really useful. So please check that out if that's something you're interested in. And finally, as always, if you'd like to start a trial of Wild Apricot, it's right there for you. So super easy. Within 30 seconds, you can get in the program and see exactly how it works. So with that, everyone, thank you so much for attending today's episode. I had a great time. Rich, I think you did too.
Thanks, everybody. That was great.
Awesome. And we will see you next time. So have a great day, great weekend, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.